This is a fictional American romance story created using AI for entertainment purposes only, intended strictly for audiences 18 years and older and not suitable for children under 18.
On most evenings, the lights of Seattle shimmered across Lake Washington like scattered pieces of broken glass. Inside the coal house, everything looked exactly the way it should. The living room was a careful composition of warm oak furniture, tall windows, and minimalist design magazines arranged on the coffee table. The kitchen smelled faintly of roasted garlic and wine. From the outside, the house suggested stability. Inside, something had begun to quietly unravel. Adrian Cole stood at the kitchen island, finishing a glass of Cabernet when he heard the front door open. "Hey," Lena called softly. Her voice carried the fatigue of a long day. He glanced at the clock. 9:47 p.m. Again. She stepped inside wearing a charcoal coat and heels she kicked off near the doorway. Her phone remained in her hand as she walked into the kitchen, tapping out one last message. Adrian forced a small smile. "Long day?" "Launch week," she sighed. "You know how it is." Lena worked as the head of marketing for Hale Digital, one of Seattle's fastest growing tech startups. The job had transformed her life in the last year. New colleagues, new parties, new pressure, new distance. Adrian slid a plate toward her. "I saved you some pasta." She looked at it, then shook her head gently. "I ate with the team." "Right." He tried to keep his voice light. She opened the fridge, grabbed sparkling water, and leaned against the counter. For a moment they simply stood there. Two people who once couldn't stop touching each other, now separated by an invisible wall. "How was your day?" she asked. "Good. Finished the Mercer Island project." "That's great." Her response came automatically, like a polite reply to a coworker. Adrian studied her quietly. Her hair was slightly windblown from the cold outside. Her lipstick had faded. She looked beautiful in the effortless way that had first drawn him to her 8 years earlier. Back then, Lena had laughed easily. Now she mostly looked tired. They moved into the living room, where Lena scrolled through her phone while Adrian pretended to watch the news. After a few minutes, he muted the television. "You're quiet tonight." She didn't look up. "Just drained." He nodded slowly. By the time they went upstairs, the house had settled into that deep nighttime stillness unique to quiet neighborhoods near the lake. Their bedroom overlooked the water. Lena disappeared into the bathroom to remove her makeup while Adrian changed into a t-shirt. He sat on the edge of the bed. When she emerged, she looked smaller somehow, wrapped in a pale silk nightshirt. She climbed into bed and pulled the covers around herself. Adrian hesitated. Then he leaned closer, brushing his fingers gently along her arm. "Hey," he murmured. She stiffened slightly. Not dramatically, just enough. "I'm really exhausted tonight," she said softly. The words were careful, practiced. Adrian withdrew his hand. "Of course." She turned off the lamp. Darkness filled the room. For a long moment he stared at the ceiling. It had started small. The first refusal had come 3 months earlier. Then another. Then another. Always gentle. Always apologetic. Tonight was the 12th time. He knew because, without meaning to, he had started counting. Beside him, Lena's breathing slowly deepened. Adrian turned toward the window where faint moonlight rippled across the lake. Something inside him tightened. Not anger. Something quieter. Doubt. He whispered into the darkness. "Lena?" No answer. She was already asleep, or pretending to be. He rolled onto his back again. Somewhere outside, a car passed slowly through the neighborhood. Adrian closed his eyes, and wondered just briefly when their marriage had begun to feel like a room where the lights had been dimmed so gradually that no one noticed the darkness creeping in. By November, the rain had settled permanently over Seattle. The sky hung low and gray most mornings, turning the glass towers downtown into ghostly silhouettes. Adrian Core had always liked this time of year. Rain had a way of slowing life down, making the city feel thoughtful. But lately, the quiet felt heavier. 3 months had passed since that first night Lena gently pushed his hand away. 3 months of small refusals. 3 months of excuses that sounded reasonable on the surface. Too tired, early meeting tomorrow, headache, stress. Each explanation arrived softly, wrapped in kindness. And because Lena never sounded cruel, Adrian found it impossible to argue. Still, something inside him was slowly eroding. On a Thursday evening, Adrian sat alone at the long dining table, reviewing blueprints under the warm glow of a desk lamp. His architecture firm had just secured a contract for a luxury apartment project near South Lake Union. The plans sprawled across the table like a paper city. Normally he would have felt proud. Tonight, he only felt distracted. The clock read 9:21 p.m. Lina had texted 2 hours earlier, running late, team dinner. He stared at the message again, though he already knew every word. The problem wasn't the message, it was how common it had become. Another buzz from his phone broke the silence. Not Lina. A notification from Instagram. He opened the app without thinking. Lina had posted a story 30 minutes earlier. A photo from what looked like a rooftop bar downtown. String lights, cocktails, smiling co-workers. Someone had tagged the location, the cloud room. Adrian leaned back in his chair. Lina stood in the center of the photo, holding a drink, laughing at something outside the frame. He studied the picture longer than he meant to. Her smile looked different, not fake, but brighter than the one she wore at home. He closed the app. The house felt suddenly too large. When Lina finally arrived, it was nearly 10:40 p.m. The front door opened with the familiar quiet click. "Adrian?" she called. "In here." She stepped into the dining room, cheeks flushed slightly from the cold. "Sorry it's late." "It's okay." She leaned down and kissed his cheek lightly. The gesture was quick, automatic. "You still working?" "Trying to." She glanced at the blueprints. "That building is going to be beautiful." "You haven't even looked at it," she smiled faintly. "I know your work." For a moment they stood there in an awkward pause. Then Lina's phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced at the screen, and something subtle happened. Her body turned away. Just slightly. Adrian noticed. Not because he was looking for it, because it felt deliberate. "Work?" he asked. "Yeah," she replied quickly. She typed a response, her thumbs moving fast. Then she slid the phone face down on the table. "Big launch coming," she added. Adrian nodded slowly.
Marcus still running everyone into the ground?
For the first time that night, Lena's expression brightened. "Marcus is intense," she admitted with a small laugh. "But he knows what he's doing." Adrian noticed the way she said his name. Not romantically, but with a kind of admiration. He tried not to think about it. Later that night, rain tapped steadily against the bedroom windows. Lena stood at the bathroom sink, removing her makeup, while Adrian changed into steep clothes. He watched the reflection in the mirror. "You've been working a lot lately. That's startup life. You used to complain about corporate burnout." "This isn't corporate," she said. "It's exciting." Her tone wasn't defensive, just distant. Adrian sat on the edge of the bed. "Do you like it there?" "I love it." She said it without hesitation. Then she added quietly, "It feels alive." The word lingered in the room. Adrian wasn't sure why it bothered him. They climbed into bed a few minutes later. For a long time they lay silently beneath the blankets. Adrian stared into the darkness. He thought about the rooftop photo, the laughter, the way Lina's smile seemed brighter somewhere else. Finally, he turned toward her. "Hey." He brushed his fingers along her waist. Soft, careful. He moved closer. For a second, Lina didn't react. Then she exhaled slowly. "Adrian." The word carried gentle warning. He froze. "I just really need sleep tonight." There it was again. Soft, kind, unarguable. He withdrew his hand immediately. "Of course." She rolled onto her side, back facing him. Within minutes, her breathing deepened. Adrian remained awake. The rain outside grew heavier. After a while, Lina's phone lit up faintly on the nightstand. A message notification. The screen illuminated the dark room for half a second. Adrian hadn't meant to look, but he did. Just a glimpse, a name. Marcus. The phone went dark again. Adrian stared at the ceiling. His chest felt strangely hollow. Maybe it was work. Maybe they were texting about the launch. Maybe everything was perfectly normal. But something small had shifted inside him. Not suspicion, not yet. Just a quiet thought he couldn't shake. Why did Lina smile more at her phone than she did at him? The next morning, Adrian woke before dawn. The house was silent. Lina still slept beside him. Her phone rested on the nightstand again, face down. He watched it for a long time. Then he turned away. Some instincts, once awakened, refused to go back to sleep, and Adrian was beginning to notice things, small things, dangerous things, the kind of details that slowly transform love into doubt. The invitation arrived on a Monday afternoon. It appeared first as a notification on Lena's phone while she stood in the kitchen making coffee. Adrian was rinsing dishes when she glanced at the screen and smiled an expression that flickered across her face before she quickly hid it. "What's that?" Adrian asked casually. "Company party," she replied. "Launch celebration." She set the phone down and stirred cream into her coffee. Marcus rented out a rooftop venue downtown. Apparently the whole team is coming. Adrian dried his hand slowly. "Am I invited?" Lena hesitated. Just for a second. "Of course," she said quickly. "Partners are welcome." But the pause had already landed. Adrian felt it the way a person notices the faint crack in a piece of glass. The party took place on a Friday night at a rooftop bar overlooking downtown Seattle. Cold wind swept between the tall buildings, but outdoor heaters glowed warmly around clusters of employees holding cocktails. The city stretched endlessly below them, wet streets reflecting neon lights, ferries gliding across Elliott Bay like moving constellations. Adrian adjusted his jacket as they stepped out of the elevator. Lena looked different tonight. Her black dress was simple but striking, hugging her figure in a way that made several heads turn when she entered the terrace. Her hair fell loosely over her shoulders, and the faint scent of jasmine followed her as she moved. Adrian had seen her dress beautifully before, but tonight it felt like she belonged to a different world. "Come on," she said, taking his hand briefly. "I'll introduce you to everyone." Music drifted through the air, low electronic beats blending with laughter and conversation. Lena moved easily through the crowd. "Adrian, this is Sarah from product, Ben from engineering, Michelle runs design." Each introduction came quickly, effortlessly. People greeted Lena warmly, even admiringly. "She basically saved our marketing strategy," someone said with a laugh. "She's the reason this launch is happening," another added. Adrian smiled politely, but he noticed something. Everyone spoke about Lena with the kind of energy usually reserved for rising stars. And rising stars always orbited something larger. A center of gravity, a leader. Marcus Hale. Adrian spotted him before Lena said his name. Marcus stood near the glass railing, talking with a small group of executives. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a navy suit without a tie. His presence filled the space without effort. People leaned toward him when he spoke. He laughed easily, confidently, the kind of laugh that suggested the world usually moved in his direction. "Marcus," Lena called. The moment the name left her mouth, Marcus turned, and Adrian saw it. Not anything obvious, just the smallest shift in Marcus's expression when he saw Lena. Recognition, warmth, something personal. "Lena," Marcus said, stepping forward. His voice carried an easy charisma. "Glad you made it." Then his eyes moved to Adrian. "And you must be the husband." Adrian extended his hand. "Adrian Cole." Marcus shook it firmly. "I've heard about you," he said. "Architect, right? Lena talks about your projects sometimes." Adrian glanced briefly at Lena. She gave a small, polite smile. "Only good things, I hope," Adrian replied. "Of course." Marcus gestured toward the skyline. "Beautiful night for a launch, huh?" They talked for a few minutes, safe conversation about business growth, Seattle development, and the endless rain. Marcus was charming, too charming, Adrian thought. The kind of man who knew exactly how to make every person in the room feel included. But Adrian also noticed something else. When Lena spoke, Marcus listened differently, more attentively. Their eyes lingered a little longer than necessary. Their smiles carried small private meanings Adrian couldn't decode. Nothing inappropriate, nothing anyone else would notice. Yet something hovered between them like a faint current in the air. Later in the evening, Adrian stepped inside the bar to order another drink. When he returned to the terrace, Lena stood near the railing again, Marcus beside her. They weren't touching, but they were close enough that their shoulders nearly brushed. The wind tugged lightly at Lena's hair as she laughed at something Marcus said. It wasn't the laugh Adrian heard at home. This one was lighter, freer. He stopped walking. For a moment, he simply watched them. Marcus leaned closer, saying something quieter now. Lena looked down briefly, then back up at him with a smile that carried a flicker of nervous energy. Adrian felt something tighten in his chest. Not proof, not betrayal, just an uncomfortable awareness. The kind that slips quietly into the mind and refuses to leave. He walked toward them. Lena noticed him first. "Hey," she said. "You were just talking about the launch numbers." Marcus nodded. "Your wife is the reason this company is about to explode," he said. Adrian handed Lena the drink he'd brought her. "Well," Adrian replied calmly, "she's always been ambitious." Marcus raised his glass. "To ambition." They clinked glasses. But Adrian noticed the way Marcus looked at Lena while saying it. Not like a boss praising an employee, more like a man recognizing an equal, or something else entirely. They left the party around midnight. The elevator ride down was quiet. Lena leaned back against the wall, scrolling through messages on her phone. "Good night?" Adrian asked. "Yeah," she said. "It was successful. Marcus seems impressive." She smiled faintly. "He is." The elevator doors opened into the lobby. They stepped into the cool night air outside. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Adrian asked lightly, "You two seem to work closely together." Lena slipped her phone into her purse. "It's a startup," she said. "Everyone works closely together." Her tone was neutral, not defensive, but final. They walked to the car in silence. As Adrian started the engine, he glanced at her. She was staring out the window now, lost in thought. The city lights slid across the glass like distant stars. Adrian gripped the steering wheel. He told himself he was imagining things. That admiration between colleagues was normal. That Lena loved her job. That nothing had actually happened. Yet the image of them standing by the railing lingered in his mind. Too close, too comfortable, too familiar. As they drove through the west streets of Seattle, Adrian felt the first real crack forming inside his certainty. Not evidence, just a shadow. And shadows, he was beginning to realize, often appeared long before the truth stepped into the light. By December, Seattle felt like a city permanently submerged in rain. The clouds never fully lifted anymore. Gray mornings blurred into gray afternoons, and by 4 o'clock, darkness pressed against the windows of Adrian Coe's office downtown. Winter had always been quiet in the architecture world. Projects slowed, clients delayed decisions until spring. Adrian used to appreciate the calm. Now, the quiet gave his thoughts too much space. It began with something small, a coincidence. Or at least that's what he told himself. One evening, Adrian sat in his office finishing a set of design revisions when his phone vibrated. A message from Lena. "Flying to San Francisco tomorrow morning. Emergency strategy meeting." He read it twice, then typed back. "How long?" A few seconds passed. Probably 2 nights. He stared at the message. San Francisco again. It would be Lena's 3rd trip there in 6 weeks. Startup life, she had explained the last time. Adrian had nodded, because questioning your wife's career felt petty, because trusting your wife was supposed to be automatic, because marriage, in theory, worked best when people didn't examine every detail too closely. Still, something about the frequency had begun to bother him. Not enough to accuse, just enough to notice. The next morning, Lena left before sunrise. Adrian stood in the kitchen doorway holding a mug of coffee as she wheeled her small suitcase toward the front door. "You sure you don't want me to drive you?" he asked. "No, it's okay. I called the car." Her coat was already on. Her hair was tied back in a neat ponytail. Efficient, professional. She kissed his cheek quickly. "Back Friday. Safe flight." Then she was gone. The house fell quiet again. Adrian listened to the sound of the car outside pulling away. For a long time he stood in the empty hallway. Later that morning he found himself sitting at his office desk staring at a browser window. He didn't remember deciding to open it. He only remembered the thought that had crept into his mind the night before. Marcus traveled often too. Adrian typed the company name into a search bar. Hale Digital Press Release. The company had been gaining attention lately. New investors, new product launches, interviews with Marcus Hale appearing in business magazines. One article mentioned an upcoming tech conference in San Francisco. Adrian scrolled. Date: Wednesday to Thursday. He leaned back slowly in his chair. That was today. The same trip Lena had just left for. His heart beat a little faster. Coincidence. It had to be. He clicked another article. Another mention of Marcus speaking at the conference. Another date. The same one again. Adrian closed the browser. He told himself it meant nothing. Companies send teams to conferences all the time. Still, the thought lingered. That night the house felt colder than usual. Adrian heated leftover soup and ate standing at the kitchen counter. The silence pressed against him. Without Lena moving through the rooms, the house seemed too large. He wandered into the living room and sat on the couch. For a moment he considered calling her, just to hear her voice. Instead, he opened Instagram again. Lena hadn't posted anything, but the company account had. A photo from the conference floor. Crowds of tech workers standing around glowing booths and presentation screens. Adrian studied the image carefully. Then he saw them, in the background, not posing, just standing together near a display. Lena and Marcus. Marcus leaned slightly toward her, speaking into her ear over the noise. Lena looked up at him, smiling. Adrian zoomed in. The image blurred into pixels. Still, the posture felt intimate, too familiar. He set the phone down slowly. The room felt very quiet. When Lena returned 2 days later, snow had begun falling over Seattle. Light flakes drifted across the lake outside their bedroom window. Adrian heard the front door open around 9 that night. "Hey," she called. He walked downstairs. "How was the trip?" "Good," she said, setting her back down. "Exhausting." She kicked off her boots and stepped into the kitchen. "Conference went well?" She paused briefly, then nodded. "Yeah, really productive." Adrian studied her face. Nothing about her expression looked unusual. No guilt, no anxiety, just the same tired professionalism she had worn for months. Still, a quiet fracture had begun forming inside him. Reality felt slightly unstable, like the ground beneath his marriage had shifted half an inch without warning. Later that night, they lay in bed again. Snow tapped softly against the window now, instead of rain. Lena curled onto her side, already half asleep. Adrian stared into the darkness. He thought about the conference photo, the way Marcus had leaned toward her, the way she had smiled. And suddenly, another memory surfaced. The rooftop party, the quiet conversation near the railing, that same closeness, that same energy. Adrian turned toward the window. The painful thought moved through his mind. Not an accusation, just a question. How long had he been the last person to notice something? In the weeks that followed, Adrian began paying attention. Not dramatically, not obsessively, just carefully. He noticed Lena's phone lighting up more often late at night. He noticed how quickly she turned the screen away when he entered the room. He noticed the way her work trips seemed to align with Marcus's public appearances. Chicago, Austin, San Francisco again. Each time she offered reasonable explanations, and each time Adrian nodded quietly. Because accusing someone you loved required certainty, and certainty still refused to arrive. What he had instead was something worse, humiliation without proof. January arrived with bitter cold. The lake outside their house turned dark and still. One night, Adrian sat alone in the living room long after Lena had gone upstairs. The glow of the fireplace flickered across the walls. He held a glass of whiskey but hadn't taken a sip. His mind kept circling the same painful thought. If Lena was truly drifting away from him, why hadn't she just told him? Why slowly erase him instead? The question lingered in the quiet room. Upstairs, he heard the faint sound of Lena's phone vibrating, followed by soft footsteps. Then silence again. Adrian closed his eyes. For the first time in their marriage, he wondered something he had never allowed himself to consider before. Not whether Lena loved him, but whether love could survive the quiet humiliation of being replaced. He finished the whiskey in one slow swallow. Outside, snow continued falling across the dark water. Winter in Seattle had never felt this long, and Adrian was beginning to understand something painful. Sometimes, the most devastating betrayals did not arrive with explosions. They arrived slowly, night after night, message after message, until a man woke up one day and realized the life he believed in had already begun slipping away. The storm arrived without warning. By late January, Seattle had been trapped in weeks of cold rain and gray skies, but that night the wind came harder than usual, rattling the tall windows of the coal house. Dark clouds rolled across the lake, swallowing the last traces of evening light. Adrian sat alone in the living room, the fireplace casting restless shadows across the walls. It was nearly 10:30 p.m. Lena had texted earlier, running late again. The message had felt familiar now, almost routine, but something about tonight felt different. Not dramatic, not explosive, just a quiet feeling that the story he had been avoiding was finally reaching the last page. He stared into the fire and waited. The front door opened around 11:12 p.m. Cold air swept briefly through the hallway as Lena stepped inside. She looked tired, cheeks flushed from the wind, hair slightly damp from the rain. "Hey," she said softly when she saw him. Adrian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched her hang her coat, watched her slip off her boots, watched her move through the house with the ease of someone who believed everything was still normal. Finally, he said, "We need to talk." The words stopped her halfway to the kitchen. She turned slowly. Something in his voice had changed. "What's wrong?" she asked. Adrian stood up from the couch. For a moment, he considered softening the moment, asking gently, pretending he didn't already know the shape of the truth. But the exhaustion inside him was deeper than anger. "I saw the photo from San Francisco," he said. Lena's expression didn't change immediately. "What photo?" "The conference one, the company post." She looked at him quietly. "And?" Adrian exhaled slowly. "And I've been noticing things, Lena." Silence filled the room. Outside, the wind struck the side of the house again. He continued carefully. "Your trips line up with Marcus's travel schedule." Her shoulders stiffened. "You're tracking my work now?" "I'm noticing patterns. That's not the same thing." "Isn't it?" Her eyes hardened slightly. "You're being paranoid." The word landed between them. Adrian rubbed his face slowly. "Am I?" He stepped closer. His voice remained calm, but there was something raw beneath it now. "Just tell me the truth." The room felt suddenly smaller. Lena crossed her arms. "There's nothing to tell." Adrian nodded once. Then he said the name quietly. "Marcus." The silence that followed felt heavier than anything they had said so far. Lena looked away first. And in that moment, Adrian knew. Not because she confessed, but because she didn't deny it. Not right away. That hesitation fractured something deep inside him. "Are you sleeping with him?" Adrian asked. The words came out softer than he expected. Not angry, just tired. Lena's eyes closed briefly. When she opened them again, the truth had already begun settling into her expression. "Yes." The word barely rose above a whisper. The sound of the wind outside suddenly felt louder. Adrian didn't move. For a long moment he simply stared at her, as if his mind was trying to rearrange the world into something that still made sense. "How long?" he asked. "Since November." 2 months. 2 months of quiet dinners. 2 months of goodnight kisses on the cheek. 2 months of lying beside him in the dark. Adrian felt the weight of every night pressed down on his chest. "Why?" he asked. Lena shook her head slowly. "It wasn't planned. It never is." She looked at him then, her eyes carrying something complicated. Not quite guilt, not quite relief. It just happened. Adrian laughed once. A short, hollow sound. "That's convenient." "Adrian, did you ever plan to tell me?" Her silence answered that question. The fireplace cracked softly behind them. Adrian stared at the floor for a long moment. Where he looked up again, his voice was quieter, but sharper. "Why him?" Lena hesitated. There she said something that would stay with Adrian for the rest of his life. "It's not just him." Adrian frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" She swallowed. And then she said it. The truth she had probably never meant to say out loud. "I stopped wanting you a long time ago." The words hung in the air like broken glass. Adrian blinked. For a moment he genuinely didn't understand. "What?" Her voice trembled slightly now. "I didn't mean for it to happen that way. It just faded." "Faded? Yes. 8 years of marriage faded. I tried to ignore it." Adrian shook his head slowly. "So every night you said you were tired. I wasn't lying about being tired. But you weren't telling the truth either." Lena looked down. The silence that followed felt unbearable. Adrian's mind replayed every night in the dark bedroom. Every gentle rejection. Every quiet apology. And suddenly, the pattern made horrifying sense. Marcus hadn't created the distance. He had simply stepped into the space that was already empty. Adrian sat down heavily on the edge of the couch. He felt strangely calm now. The kind of calm that arrives when something inside a person finally breaks. "So when did it start?" he asked quietly. Lena didn't answer immediately. "Maybe a year ago," she said. "A year." Adrian nodded slowly. "A year of pretending. I didn't know how to fix it. You could have told me. I was afraid." "Of what?" She looked at him then. "Of hurting you." Adrian let out another hollow laugh. "That worked out well." Her eyes filled with tears. "Adrian, I never meant for this to happen. But it did." "Yes, and you kept choosing it." She didn't deny that. The wind outside slammed something against the house. Neither of them flinched. After a long silence, Adrian finally stood. He looked at Lena the way a man looks at a photograph from another life. I loved you, he said quietly. I know. No, he corrected gently. You don't. The room fell silent again. Then Adrian walked past her toward the stairs. Where are you going? She asked. To sleep. He stopped halfway up the staircase, but he didn't turn around. For the first time in months, his voice sounded completely certain. Don't come to bed tonight. The words weren't angry, they were final. Adrian continued upstairs. Behind him, Lena remained standing in the dim living room, the fire slowly dying in the hearth. Outside, the winter storm continued sweeping across the lake, and inside the house, something that had once been a marriage finally collapsed into silence. The separation did not happen all at once. There was no screaming, no smashed dishes, no dramatic final argument. Instead, Adrian and Lena's marriage dissolved the way winter ice melts slowly, quietly, until the structure holding everything together simply vanished. 3 days after the confrontation, Adrian packed a suitcase. The house overlooking Lake Washington felt unfamiliar now. Every room carried echoes of conversations that no longer belonged to them. Lena stood in the kitchen while he folded shirts into a small travel bag. Neither of them raised their voices. Where will you go? She asked. A place downtown for now. She nodded. You don't have to rush. I do. Her fingers tightened around the coffee mug in her hands. Adrian, we should talk about this. He sipped the suitcase. There's nothing left to talk about. That's not true. He looked at her calmly. You're seeing someone else. Her eyes dropped. That's pretty straightforward. The words weren't cruel, they were simply factual. He carried the suitcase to the front door. For a moment he hesitated. This had been their home for 5 years. The place where they celebrated promotions, birthdays, quiet Sunday mornings drinking coffee by the window. Now it felt like a stage set after the actors had left. Lena spoke again behind him. I never meant to destroy everything. Adrian turned halfway toward her. You didn't destroy it in one moment. He opened the door. It happened little by little. Then he stepped outside. Adrian's new apartment was 12 floors above Pike Street, in a narrow building squeezed between a coffee shop and a bookstore. The space was small, 1 bedroom, 1 couch, bare white walls, but it had large windows overlooking downtown Seattle. At night, the city lights flickered endlessly below. Adrian spent the first week unpacking slowly. There wasn't much to unpack. Clothes, books, a laptop, a few framed photographs he eventually decided not to display. Work became his anchor. He stayed late at the architecture firm most nights, refining designs, reviewing structural models, losing himself in details that required precision rather than emotion. His colleagues noticed the change. You're here early lately, his partner David remarked one morning. Adrian shrugged. Project deadlines. David studied him for a moment. You okay? Adrian forced a small smile. Just busy. In truth, work felt like the only place where the world still followed clear rules. Angles made sense. Buildings stood because the math behind them was correct. Human relationships were less reliable. Meanwhile, life at the house by the lake continued, but differently. Lena still woke up each morning and drove to the Hale Digital office downtown. But the atmosphere there had shifted. Not publicly. Not in a way anyone could clearly point to. Yet something about her relationship with Marcus now existed in open air rather than hidden corners. They didn't hold hands. They didn't act reckless, but their closeness had grown undeniable. Late meetings, private conversations, long dinners after work. At first, Lena believed she had finally stepped into the life she wanted. Marcus was magnetic, confident, successful. Being near him felt exciting in ways her marriage had stopped feeling. One evening, they sat together in Marcus's high-rise apartment overlooking Elliott Bay. The windows stretched from floor to ceiling, revealing ferries gliding across dark water under the glow of the city skyline. Marcus poured wine into 2 glasses. You've been quiet tonight, he said. Just tired. He handed her the drink. You worry too much. About what? Everything. Lena studied him carefully. Do you ever think about consequences? Marcus leaned back against the couch. Of what? Us. He shrugged casually. We're adults. That's not what I meant. What did you mean? She hesitated. My marriage ended. Marcus took a sip of wine. Yes. And? And what? Lena stared at him. I thought things would change. Marcus's brow creased slightly. They have changed. How? He gestured around the apartment. You're here, aren't you? The answer felt strangely empty. Lena looked down at her glass. For the first time, something unsettled her. Weeks passed. Adrian slowly settled into his new routines. Morning coffee at a cafe downstairs, long days at the architecture firm, evenings walking through the city streets where no one recognized him as part of a once-admired couple. One night he stopped at a small bar near Capitol Hill after work. He sat alone at the counter, sipping whiskey while watching rain slide down the windows. The woman beside him glanced over. Rough day? Adrian smiled faintly. Something like that. Seattle in winter will do that. Yeah. She raised a glass. To surviving it. He clinked his drink lightly against hers. For the first time in months, Adrian felt something unusual. Not happiness, but the faint possibility of it returning someday. Across the city, Lena sat alone in her car outside the lake house. The lights inside were off. Marcus had cancelled dinner that evening, another sudden meeting with investors. She stared at the dark house. The silence felt unfamiliar now. Adrian had once filled this place with quiet steadiness. His books on the table, his voice in the kitchen, his presence in the bedroom beside her. She walked inside. The emptiness greeted her immediately. She moved through the room slowly. Everything remained exactly the same, except the person who used to live there. Lena sat on the couch and scrolled through her phone. Marcus had sent a message. Crazy night, rain check. She stared at it for a long time. Then she opened an old photo buried deep in her camera roll. A picture from years earlier. Adrian standing beside her on a ferry crossing Puget Sound. Wind in his hair, his arm around her shoulders. Both of them laughing at something outside the frame. Lena closed the photo quickly. A strange thought slipped into her mind. Maybe she hadn't just ended the marriage. Maybe she had walked away from the only person who had ever truly stayed. Winter continued stretching across Seattle. Two lives now moved separately through the same city. One slowly rebuilding, the other beginning, quietly, to question the choice that had broken everything. And neither of them yet understood how difficult the next chapter would become. Spring arrived quietly in Seattle. The rain softened first, then the gray skies began breaking open for brief stretches of pale sunlight that warmed the sidewalks and woke the cherry trees along the streets. People filled the parks again. Outdoor cafes reopened. The city felt alive in a way winter had suppressed for months. But inside Lena's life, something colder had begun to settle. It started with small disappointments. Marcus cancelled dinner again.
Then another weekend trip they had loosely planned never happened. Then a late-night message arrived instead of the conversation she expected. Investor meetings all week. Crazy schedule. At first Lena told herself this was normal. Marcus ran a fast-growing tech company. His life moved at a speed most people couldn't keep up with. But the pattern repeated. One night she sat across from him at a sleek restaurant downtown, watching him scroll through emails between bites of steak. "Are you even listening?" she asked quietly. Marcus looked up briefly. "Sorry, what were you saying?" She placed her fork down. "I was talking about the apartment lease." "Oh," he leaned back in his chair. "You're still thinking about moving? You said we'd talk about living together." Marcus frowned slightly, as if trying to recall the conversation. "Did I?" Her chest tightened. "Yes." He shrugged lightly. "Maybe someday." The casual tone in his voice unsettled her more than an argument would have. "Someday when?" she asked. Marcus took a sip of wine. "Why rush things?" Lena stared at him. "My marriage ended." "Yes," he said again, the same neutral response. "And?" "And what?" The exact same words he had used months earlier. This time they landed differently. Not confusing, not surprising, just empty. That night Lena drove home alone. The lake house appeared dark in the distance as she pulled into the driveway. The place still looked beautiful. The same large windows facing the water. The same quiet deck Adrian used to sit on during summer evenings. But inside, the house felt hollow. She walked through the kitchen slowly. Adrian's coffee machine was still on the counter. She had never moved it. For months she had taught herself it didn't matter. Now the sight of it made her chest ache unexpectedly. She sat at the dining table. Silence filled the room. And for the first time since Adrian left, memories began arriving without resistance. Adrian standing in the kitchen on Sunday mornings, reading architecture magazines while waiting for coffee to brew. Adrian fixing the loose railing on the back deck because she once mentioned it felt unsafe. Adrian staying up late with her when she was nervous about her first presentation at Hair Digital. "Just breathe," he had said quietly that night. "You'll be great."
She remembered how calm he had sounded, how certain. Not dramatic, not intense, just steady. At the time she had mistaken that steadiness for boredom. Now it looked different. Now it looked like loyalty. Weeks passed. Marcus grew more distant. Some nights he didn't answer her messages until the next morning. Other nights he responded with brief, one-word replies. When they did meet, their conversation stayed light and surface level. No plans, no future, just moments. One evening, Lena asked him directly, "Do you see this going anywhere?" Marcus looked genuinely confused. "What do you mean?" "Us." He leaned back on the couch in his apartment. "I thought we were just enjoying things." Her stomach tightened. Enjoying things? You know, no pressure. The words felt like cold water. Lena stared at him. "You knew I left my husband?" Marcus shrugged. "That was your decision." The sentence hung in the air like a final verdict. And suddenly, Lena saw the truth she had been avoiding. Marcus had never asked her to leave Adrian. He had never promised anything. Everything she believed about their future had existed only in her imagination. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in the large bedroom of the lake house staring at the ceiling. The emptiness beside her felt heavier than ever. She remembered something Adrian once said years ago. Marriage isn't exciting every day. It's just choosing the same person again and again. At the time she had rolled her eyes. Now the words felt painfully wise, because Adrian had chosen her every day, even when she stopped choosing him. 2 days later, Lena found herself driving downtown. She told herself she was just running errands, but the car turned automatically toward Pike Street, toward the neighborhood where Adrian had moved. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. She had never visited his new apartment. They had barely spoken since the separation. A few necessary messages about paperwork, nothing else. Still, something inside her pushed forward. Maybe it was guilt, maybe regret, maybe the desperate hope that some bridges weren't completely burned. She parked across the street from the building. For several minutes she simply sat there, watching people walk past, watching the entrance door open and close. Finally, she stepped out of the car. Her heart beat faster with every step toward the building. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of fresh paint and coffee. A small directory listed apartment numbers. She found Adrian's name quickly. Apartment 1207. Her finger hovered over the intercom button. What was she even going to say? "I made a mistake? I miss you? Please forgive me?" None of the sentences felt big enough to repair what she had broken. Still, she pressed the button. The speaker crackled softly. A few seconds passed. Then Adrian's voice came through. "Yes?" The sound of it made her chest tighten. "It's me," Lena said quietly. Silence filled the speaker, long enough that she thought he might hang up. Finally, he replied. "Lena." His voice sounded calm, not angry, not warm either, just distant. "I was wondering if we could talk," she said. Another pause. Then the door downstairs buzzed open. "You can come up," he said. The elevator ride felt impossibly long. When the doors opened on the 12th floor, Adrian was already standing in the hallway. He looked different, not dramatically, but lighter somehow. His posture straighter, his expression more composed. For a moment they simply looked at each other. "Hi," Lena said softly. "Hi." He stepped aside to let her into the apartment. The space was simple but warm, sunlight spilling through the tall windows onto wooden floors. Lena glanced around. "You've made it nice." Adrian shrugged. "It's enough." An awkward silence followed. Finally she spoke. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. I figured." Her throat tightened. "Marcus and it's not what I thought it was." Adrian didn't respond. "I think I made a mistake." He looked at her carefully now. "A mistake?" "Yes," Lena swallowed. "I miss what we had." The room felt very still. For a long moment Adrian said nothing. Then he walked toward the window overlooking the city. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "Lena." She waited. "I believed you when you said you stopped wanting me." The words landed gently, but they carried the weight of everything that had happened. Lena felt tears gathering in her eyes. "I didn't understand what I was throwing away." Adrian turned toward her slowly. His expression wasn't angry. It was something more complicated. Something that had taken months to build. Distance. "You might be right," he said, "but some things don't come back once they're gone." The silence between them stretched longer, and for the first time since Adrian walked out of the house, Lena felt the real possibility that she had lost him forever. Late spring sunlight filled Adrian's apartment with a soft golden glow. The rain that had dominated Seattle for months had finally faded into warmer days. From the 12th floor windows, the city looked alive, people moving along sidewalks, ferries cutting quiet lines across the water, sunlight reflecting off glass towers. Lena stood near the center of the living room. Adrian leaned against the window behind her. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The silence wasn't hostile. It was simply the weight of everything they had once shared pressing quietly between them. "I didn't expect things to feel like this," Lena said finally. Adrian folded his arms. "Like what?" She struggled to find the words. "Empty." He didn't respond. Lena glanced around the apartment again. The place reflected Adrian perfectly now. Simple furniture, clean lines, architecture books stacked neatly on a shelf. There were plants near the window, sunlight touching their leaves. The space felt calm, peaceful, a life that had slowly grown without her. "You seem different," she said. Adrian gave a faint smile. "Time does that." She nodded slowly. "I guess it does." Another silence settled. Outside, a ferry horn echoed faintly across the harbor. Lena took a breath. "I ended things with Marcus." Adrian didn't look surprised. "When?" "A few weeks ago." He nodded once. "I see." "That's it?" she asked quietly. "What else should I say?" She looked at him helplessly. "I thought you might want to know. I assumed it would happen eventually." Her brow creased. "You did?" "Yes. Why?" Adrian walked toward the kitchen counter and poured himself a glass of water. Because Marcus had never looked at Lena the way Adrian once had. Because Adrian had begun to understand something painful but clear. People like Marcus chased excitement. They didn't build lives. But Adrian simply said, "Some things are predictable." Lena watched him carefully. "You're not angry anymore." "No." "Why?" He leaned against the counter. "Because anger is exhausting." "And now?" "Now I'm just finished." The word landed quietly in the room. Finished. Lena felt her chest tighten. She stepped closer to him. "Adrian, I came here because I needed to tell you something." He waited. "I made the biggest mistake of my life." Her voice trembled now. "I thought passion meant something deeper than stability. I thought excitement meant love." She wiped at her eyes quickly. "But I was wrong." Adrian listened without interrupting. "I threw away the one person who actually cared about me," she continued. "You were always there, even when I didn't deserve it." Her words filled the apartment with a fragile honesty. "I know I don't deserve another chance," she said quietly, "but I had to try." The sentence hung between them. Adrian looked at her carefully. For the first time that day, something softened briefly in his expression. Memories flickered through his mind. 8 years of marriage, road trips along the coast, lazy Sunday mornings, the way Lena used to fall asleep on the couch with a book in her hands. He had loved her deeply, that part was true. But another memory rose more strongly. Night after night lying beside her in silence, the quiet rejection, the slow erosion of his confidence. The moment she had said the words that changed everything. "I stopped wanting you a long time ago." Adrian set the glass down gently. "Do you remember what you told me that night?" he asked. Lena nodded slowly. "I do. You said Marcus wasn't the reason." She looked down. "Yes, you said you stopped wanting me long before he appeared." Her voice barely formed a reply. "I regret saying that." Adrian shook his head gently. "You shouldn't." She looked up, confused. "Why not?" "Because it was honest." The room grew very quiet again. Adrian stepped toward the window. Sunlight spilled across the floor between them. "For months, I kept asking myself what I did wrong," he said quietly. Lena felt her throat tighten. "I thought maybe I wasn't attractive enough. Maybe I had become boring. Maybe I stopped trying." His voice remained calm, but the memory still carried weight. "You know what the hardest part was?" "What?" she whispered. "Loving someone who didn't want to touch you anymore." Tears slid down Lena's cheeks. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know." He looked back at her. "And eventually I realized something important." She waited. "Love isn't supposed to feel like begging." The sentence settled deeply into the room. Lena felt it more than heard it. "I miss you," she said softly. Adrian didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked toward the door and opened it. The hallway beyond was bright and quiet. Lena stared at the open doorway. Her heart sank slowly as the meaning became clear. "You're asking me to leave," she said. Adrian's voice remained gentle. "Yes." Her eyes filled again. "You won't even think about it?" "I already did." "For how long?" "Months." The answer felt final. Lena took a few slow steps toward the door. When she reached it, she stopped and turned back. "Did you ever stop loving me?" The question lingered in the air. Adrian thought about it carefully. Then he answered honestly. "No." Hope flickered briefly across her face, but his next words extinguished it. "I just stopped wanting someone who didn't want me." The quiet dignity in the sentence felt stronger than anger ever could have been. Lena lowered her gaze. For the first time, she fully understood the distance between them. Not bitterness, not revenge, just a door that had closed quietly and completely. She stepped into the hallway. Adrian remained inside the apartment. For a moment, neither moved. "Goodbye, Adrian," she said. He nodded once. "Take care of yourself." The door closed gently, not slammed, not forced, just closed. Adrian stood in the quiet apartment for several minutes. Sunlight continued pouring through the windows. The city moved outside as it always had, life continuing forward. He walked back to the window and looked out across Seattle. For months he had believed losing Lena meant losing the center of his life. Now he understood something different. Sometimes dignity arrives only after heartbreak strips everything else away. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is simply stop asking for love that isn't freely given. Adrian took a slow breath, then he turned away from the window. And for the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like something he feared. It felt like something he was finally ready to walk into.